In the heart of Lithuania, archaeologists search for a tunnel, rumored to have been dug by desperate Jewish prisoners inside a little-known Nazi execution site called Ponar.
They were systematically exterminating people at this site.
Once you get taken away, you go to Ponar to die. Nobody comes out of Ponar alive.
Let's look at the IP, see what we get.
The investigation will open a nearly forgotten chapter of the Holocaust. The story of Vilna, a renowned center of Jewish culture, destroyed by the Nazis. Now, a team of scientists from around the world has come here,
Could be a trench, could be a pit.
searching for the last traces of a vanished people.
Where's the grave here?
Who were they?
Vilna was one of the most important cities in Jewish history.
It had the greatest scholars. It had the greatest writers.
Armed with advanced scientific tools, their work will help restore the memory of this lost world. And something more.
We're picking up 2 hotspots.
A story of hope in the city's final hours. But time is running out. Few remain who remember. Is there anything left to be found?
There is something there.
The secret history of Vilna and the legendary Holocaust escape tunnel.
Take the moment. Take the moment.
Right now on Nova. Just 6 miles outside of Lithuania's capital city is a forest park few have ever heard of. Here, more than 70,000 people, most of them Jews, were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. There are no gravestones. The bodies could be anywhere. But that's not the only secret buried here. More than 75 years ago, 80 Jewish prisoners attempted to dig a tunnel and escape. Only the entrance was ever found, leaving questions unanswered. Was it ever finished? Where did it lead? The answers seem lost to time, but can science reopen the investigation and help us understand not only this place, but the Holocaust itself?
It's strange to say, but the Holocaust is actually much more terrible than we realize, and it happened in a way different than we think.
For some, it is a history still unresolved.
Shalom.
These people are the children of a unique group of Holocaust survivors. Their fathers survived the killing pits of Ponar Forest.
My father used to say that they started it just behind.
Not that I ever doubted that the stories were the right stories, obviously.
They heard stories of the tunnel. But with their fathers now gone, and no firm evidence, only questions remain. What really happened?
It would complete the entire picture if they would find the tunnel.
Now, 2 archaeologists, Richard Freund of the University of Hartford and John Seligman of the Israeli Antiquities Authority, believe they can answer these questions. But doing so will take them to a place few would expect: Lithuania. Armed with new technology,
We now know we're going to follow that line back.
their mission is focused on a renowned city of 70,000 Jews wiped out by the Nazis. The traces are almost invisible today. And with each passing decade, the story is further distorted by the lens of time.
We're picking up 2 hotspots.
To unlock the hidden history of this lost city will require not one investigation, but 3. The search begins where Vilna ended, the brutal Nazi execution site known as Ponar. To this day, the location of multiple mass graves is still a mystery. The second piece of the puzzle is Vilna's great synagogue, devastated by the Nazis, erased by the Soviets after the war, as if to warn the Jews, don't come back. The last piece takes them back to the forest and Vilna's final chapter, to find proof that the escape tunnel really existed. If successful, the team may uncover not just a lost civilization, but a turning point in the evolution of the Nazi killing machine. Today, few clues would reveal it, but more than 75 years ago, it was here in Lithuania that the final solution, the systematic mass murder of 6 million Jews, first began. Before the industrialized killing of the gas chambers in places like Auschwitz, the Nazis and their collaborators murdered Jews here by the thousands, one bullet at a time.
They began killing 500, 600, 700 people per day. This is ground zero for the final solution.
It is a painful history Lithuania is only now beginning to explore. The pieces were in motion by 1940. Lithuania was trapped under a brutal occupation by Stalin's Soviet army. With the Germans approaching the border, anti-Semitism, already simmering, exploded.
Right before the war, Nazi propaganda flooded the country of Lithuania, promoting the idea that Jews were communists and communists were Jews, and that if the Soviet Union was moving tanks into the country, it was because of the Jews. Now, in fact, most Jews were not communists, and most communists were not Jews. But that idea really took hold in the Lithuanian consciousness, and it was very, very damaging.
Amidst the upheaval, the Soviet army began digging pits to store oil and gas just outside the capital, in Ponar Forest. Samuel Bach, now an internationally known artist, spent part of his childhood in the nearby village.
I was there. I was in Ponar, in this dacha of my aunt. I remember this kind of the noise of the digging of their construction that was supposed to be a big base for containers of gas.
But construction was never finished. In June 1941, the Germans invaded Lithuania and pushed the Soviets out.
In June, the Germans attacked us. They bombed us. And on the 24th, they walked into our city.
The Nazis soon found Lithuanian collaborators eager to help in the killing of Jews. They also found something else: the freshly dug pits in the forest. Just days after the invasion, they brought the first victims to the site, where they were shot.
And this Holocaust by bullets, as it's called, that's how it starts. It's how half of the victims die. But it's also the decisive moment when it's realized that something like this is possible.
This was the tipping point, because at this place, they began systematically killing the Jews.
When historians try to understand, when did the Germans decide that the policy of the war would be total annihilation, total extermination of the Jews? They look at the summer of 1941 and they see a real turning point in this transition to mass murder.
The killing was directed by Nazi troops known as Einsatzgruppen.
We know the people's names. Martin Weiss was the head of that unit, and he was the person who directly responsible for the management of Punau. Under his control, he had now 150 Lithuanian volunteers from the Lithuanian Rifle Association who went into another unit which is called the Special Ones. They were the ones who were directly responsible for the actual killing and the actual annihilation of the Jewish population on a day-to-day basis.
Поступили следующим образом. Отправили в Панары, поскольку Панары — это лагерь смерти.
Going to Punar was death. That's what people said. There was no escaping.
Решили, пусть поработает.
Today, trains still pass by Punar Forest.
You're hearing the trains going by. There were three ways that they used to bring the victims here. One was by truck, one was by walking, and one was by train. So when you hear these trains, you're listening to the sounds of the first moments of the final solution.
Little evidence survives. The Jewish State Museum here is determined to preserve what still remains. 6 burial pits have been identified so far. There may be more.
There are as many as 12 burial pits here.
But how to find them? German aerial photographs from the war provide one clue. More recently, a LiDAR study commissioned by the Jewish State Museum used laser imagery to strip away the foliage, confirming the 6 known pits. A large indentation in the ground nearby reveals a possible 7th pit. But they can't simply start digging.
The biggest problem that you face is that there are people buried here. How do you excavate to find out which way?
Geophysicists Paul Baumann and Alistair McClymont
Interesting to see how deep that is.
Very deep.
are using a tool that is relatively new to the field of archaeology: electrical resistivity tomography. The technology requires no digging at all. Instead, the team will essentially scan the ground in a narrow slice, generating a picture of the soil hidden below.
We have these gadgets, these things that can see under the ground. Our goal is to identify the area of the pit, the depth of the pit, and then we can calculate a volume in the pit.
Once the volume is known, the team can then estimate the number of bodies buried within. The first step is to hammer a line of metal spikes into the ground. The spikes are then linked together with cables. A control unit, powered by a car battery, then fires hundreds of electrical pulses and measures the way the soil conducts electricity. The resulting measurements are then assembled into a detailed map, revealing what lies below. To the trained eyes of the geophysicists, it can reveal where the natural soil ends and any disturbance, like a mass grave, begins.
It is a subtle signature. However, we're fortunate that in this environment, it's this homogeneous sand where everything looks the same. So even a subtle signature stands out very clearly.
The entire process takes hours as the machine sends electricity into the ground, slowly mapping the soil.
Something's happening.
It takes multiple passes.
How many meters do you think it could be off? 5 to 10? 10 to 20?
Before they finally start to see results.
Oh, this is better.
So that's good. Looks like we have a pit.
The rest of the team is summoned, and Freund briefs the student volunteers.
It's about 24 meters large, 4 meters deep. So It's a burial pit. If somebody asks you what is going on here, you could say that there are about 5,000 to 7,000 people who are buried in this unknown pit.
Thousands of people buried in this forest, murdered by the Nazis. But who were they? Today, this city goes by its Lithuanian name, Vilnius. But for centuries, it also had another name, one rarely heard now, Vilna. Its name in both Hebrew and Yiddish, the everyday language of European Jews. They called it the Jerusalem of the North.
That's an unusual title. There are only a few communities in Jewish history that got named the Jerusalem of.
Vilna was one of the most important cities in Jewish history, certainly one of the capitals of European Jewish civilization.
Prior to World War II, Jews made up a large part of the city.
Most people think New York is a very, very Jewish city. Well, that's 15%. But Vilna was, at its peak, 40% Jewish.
It was a center of Jewish learning, of Jewish culture, of Jewish politics.
6 Jewish newspapers, museums, the largest Jewish library in the world. Essia Friedman was born in Vilna before the war.
For me, Vilna was the most beautiful place in the world. Everything was gorgeous. Any little synagogue that you went in was beautiful.
There was all this learning, and there was a very specific cultural character of the Jews of Vilna that was the result of the studies and the attitudes of a very famous rabbi who is called the Gaon of Vilna.
The Gaon's legacy of scholarship, both religious and secular, came to permeate all of Vilna. But today, Vilna's most sacred places have vanished. This patch of soil was once the most important Jewish landmark in the entire city. For centuries, this was the site of the Great Synagogue of Vilna. Destroyed by the Nazis, the ruins were leveled by the Soviets, who sealed them away by building a school on top. Only fragments survive in museums today. Some of those fragments were recovered in 2011, when Lithuanian archaeologists dug 3 excavation pits next to the modern school.
The goal was to pinpoint more precisely the location of the Great Synagogue itself and the main architectural features of the synagogue.
The excavations uncovered pieces of the main worship area.
What's amazing is it was right here where the Ark sat. And they found the column base and the steps leading up to the main bema where the Torah was read.
Today, much of the worship area lies buried under the school, but the complex was far larger.
We've got to look at this whole complex as a sort of community center. If you would have been coming in from the Jewish street over there, you would have been walking down Jewish Street, coming in through the main courtyard.
Dating back to the 16th century, the Great Synagogue was not the only synagogue in the city. In fact, there were more than 100. Then, as now, Judaism was diverse, ranging from ultra-Orthodox to secular. But the Great Synagogue, more than any other, was integral to the identity of Vilna.
It was unmatched. There was nothing like it.
The complex housed the world-famous library, kosher meat butchers, and a communal well. It also held another critical structure, the mikveh, the ritual bath required for observant Jews.
It potentially could be one of the oldest parts of the structure, so that's a really important aspect of the whole complex.
Based on historical diagrams, John Seligman suspects the mikveh is under the playground. For the archaeological team, it is an appealing target.
Mikvahs are great places to excavate because people lose all their personal items when they're going into the bath.
Recovering this lost world is a personal mission for many on the team. Lithuanian archaeologists, Israeli volunteers, American students.
For me personally, my goal was to be able to contribute to mankind and be able to say that I did something.
For lead archaeologist John Seligman, the investigation is even more significant. His family once lived here.
So this, for them, would have been the place they would have looked up to as the most important place within their own community.
Most of them were murdered in the killing pits of Ponar.
Looking over my shoulder as my grandfather, maybe thinking, good on you. And so for me, that's something of great meaning.
With no clues visible from the surface, the search for the mikveh begins with a technology known as ground-penetrating radar. Harry Joel is the team's GPR expert.
So ground-penetrating radar, or known as GPR, uses FM radio waves, just like we're listening to in the car here. We're actually putting those waves into the ground. They're reflecting off of surfaces, and that's what we're seeing in the radar.
By measuring how quickly the signals are reflected back to the unit, GPR can reveal features in the ground that don't look natural.
Particularly in archaeological, you're looking for those right corners. Nothing in nature builds anything with a right corner. And so we can figure out a feature that has a right corner. We can say, oh, that's a building, that's human.
With scanning complete, the data is sent to California for processing while the team sleeps. By morning, the results are ready.
The data just came back, and what we're seeing here in these slices is some straight lines, and they're coming at right angles. The only thing that these could be is potential walls.
Joel hands the data over to cartographer Phil Reeder.
We look for all the existing maps and diagrams, and then what we're able to do is we're able to overlay them on top of each other, get everything in the same scale, and then we can add our data to that.
When the GPR data is matched against the floor plan of the complex from before the war, the team knows exactly where to start. The first loads of soil go into the sifters. And almost immediately, artifacts appear.
And now we have silverware. I don't think we're in a kitchen, although the possibility is that somebody was actually cooking here because there's coals, there's burnt wood.
Coins, pottery, tiles from the large heating stoves that once stood here.
You'd have like a stove which would be stoked from below and would be heating up the water. And the room itself, the room would have to be warm as well. I mean, you're talking Lithuania today, it's a nice sunny day, but in the winter over here, it's miserable. It's fantastic, and it's beautifully decorated.
The tiles from the heater suggest they may be close to the mikveh, close to discovering a key part of the great synagogue that was burned and bombed by the Germans during the war. In 1941, the 70,000 Jews of Vilna found themselves trapped. There was no escaping the Nazis.
And then, of course, a sudden occupation of the Nazi Germany. So there was no much time to run away from Lithuania.
And there were a few trains which left Vilnius, but many traveled on foot, and they couldn't even cross old Soviet Lithuanian borders. They had no proper documents.
It was like a nightmare. No doctors, no going to school, no walking on the sidewalk, no food. The Germans immediately told us that we had to be marked, so we put on the yellow Star of David.
Soon, the door-to-door searches began, and people started disappearing.
And this is a time, it's late June, early July, 1941, when Vilnius is a very dangerous place for Jews. They snatch from streets, they are taken by so-called harpoons. This is Yiddish word for people who are catching.
10 weeks after the invasion, the remaining Jews were forced into one of two ghettos, including young Samuel Bach.
One day, the Lithuanian police came and said, you just take with you what you can carry and go out into the street.
In one apartment, like 50 people here, one by the other, one by the other.
One Saturday morning, my mama heard screaming. She opened the door, and there was an elderly man from my street being shoved. These barbarians were pushing an old man. Then they went after my friend, Nahama was her name. She had a sister and a baby and parents. And the little girl was crying. So they bayoneted her and threw her out.
Children were regularly targeted.
My sister was 2 years younger than her. Her name is Shenele. Shenele in Hebrew, it means Yafa. In English, it's beauty. And she was really beautiful. In that morning when I kissed her, I said to her, I will never see you again. And I didn't see her again. It was my last time that I saw her, like an angel.
My mother was brave. I don't understand it. She went to work, but she would hide me in an attic. And she would go to work. I was hungry, and she would always tell me, not a word, you have to stay quietly. And she was hiding me out. And this is how I lived for what I thought was a long, long time.
Also hiding inside the ghetto was a group of Jewish rebels determined to fight back, known as the FPO, or simply the Partisans. Their leader was a man named Abba Kovner.
It's no coincidence it's in Lithuania, it's in Vilna, that we first see somebody like Kovner who says, this is not isolated. This is something that is going to happen to every Jew in Europe.
The partisans began to stockpile weapons, hoping to hold on until the Soviets returned to drive the Nazis out. In 1943, the FPO snuck out of the ghetto through the sewers. They began launching attacks on Nazi targets in the forests around the city, including Ponar. By this time, the Nazi execution site here had been active for 2 years. About 70,000 Jews had been murdered, along with thousands of suspected communists and other people the Nazis deemed enemies. The burial pits were nearly full. It was damning evidence, and the Russians were coming.
By December of 1943, the Nazis knew that the Russians were on the border, ready to take back Lithuania. They had committed, by that time, nearly 100,000 atrocities, meaning the people had been shot and they were kept in these burial pits, but they now needed the evidence to disappear into ash.
Only a few thousand Jews were left in prisons and small labor camps in the area. The Nazis gathered 80 of the healthiest and brought them to Ponar, not to be shot, but to work. Much later, their children learned the story of their ordeal.
He was the youngest one, my father. There were 80 people that worked. There were 4 women that were in the kitchen.
During the first months, they were asked to cut down trees, and they were not told what the trees were to be used for. Towards the end of 1943, somewhere in December, the beginning of 44, they were told what the purpose of those logs were.
The German commandant of Ponar said, the reason that we brought you here is because all these Lithuanians committed these horrific crimes against the Jews, and we want you to clean that up.
Their job would be to dig them out and burn them.
Dig out the thousands of bodies and burn them.
The diggers, the burners, everybody had their own task. The younger people were charged with pulling out the gold teeth.
He said the corpses were already decomposed, but he recognized some of them by the clothes. I think he found his 2 children, I'm not sure, but I know for sure that he found his wife and he found his other family members. They used to burn, he said, about 200 corpses on each layer of wood, of logs. They used to put like 10 layers, so it was about 2,000 corpses plus or minus a day.
He said that in one big hole they counted between 22 to 25,000 bodies. My father said, you can try to imagine what you can't imagine it.
The stacks of bodies were so large, ramps were needed to build the topmost layers.
This is the burning brigade's bridge that they used, and they would be able to grab the bodies and then they would be able to throw them onto pyres.
As a child, I remember him waking up and shouting Lithuanian pajarne, which is fire or something like this, burning of fire. He was really haunted by those pictures.
כנראה הוא לא רצה לפגוע בנפשות הצעירות שלנו.
She says that, in fact, her father didn't tell very much. He actually was silent most of the time. And he would sit silently and chain smoke.
My father afterwards kept on washing hands all the time.
And in December, January, they all realized, those 80 Jews, 76 men, 4 women, that when they're finished, they would be the last victims. So they hatched a plan.
He said that all we thought is that someone will survive and tell the world what's going on, what happened here.
And they started digging an escape tunnel for 76 days.
He said there were 2 of them at the time. One would dig and another one would ferry the dirt back into the bunker.
אחרי מלחמה,
She says that the candle they were using for lighting would go out. There wasn't enough oxygen to keep the candle going, so her father set up an electrical system with a light bulb.
The tunnel, despite being small, had to be correctly engineered. One had to understand the distribution of pressure and so on. My grandfather had a degree in engineering and could be useful in the construction.
These stories testify to the existence of a tunnel. But so many years later, can it be found?
We do a lot of tunnel detection, and it's really difficult, and especially a tunnel like that where it's hand dug, it's small, there's nothing in it, there's no metal supports, it's surrounded by sand. Very improbable.
But can new technology help?
So when I come to these projects, I don't expect everything to work and us to find everything we're looking for. I just want to have some success.
The team has only one clue to go on. A Lithuanian excavation in 2004 that identified the entrance.
The entrance to the tunnel was found in the original excavations they did, but they couldn't find the continuation of the tunnel. That was the key.
The first thing the geophysics team needs to figure out is the direction the tunnel would take if ever completed. Architect Ken Ben-Simon spent his career designing prisons.
Our design was to prevent escapes and to prevent the design of tunnels.
Ruling out where the Lithuanians already excavated, and knowing the diggers would not have backtracked across the pit, Ben-Simon has flagged an area for examination. And on their very first run, the team gets a surprise.
Wow, it's exactly there.
One hotspot stands out. It looks like the cross-section of a collapsed tunnel, about 130 feet away from the previously discovered entrance, back in the pit. Most of the soil, colored blue, is too dry and sandy to conduct electricity very well. But the soil in the collapsed tunnel is looser and holds more moisture, conducting more electricity and generating the signal they see on their screens.
It rains here a lot. Here you even have a ditch leading into it where it's collapsed. And even if it's collapsed, it's not going to be as compact as the originally sand that was laid down.
Okay.
It's not definitive, though. They need to verify this signal is a segment of a tunnel. So they decide to scan the entrance found in 2004 and check if the images match.
So this is the area where the tunnel began. The entrance is about 4 feet below where I'm standing right now.
Though the pit is empty today, a small hut stood here, later sketched by one of the survivors.
They were told to build their own living quarters and basically said that the German commandant of Ponar said, "This is where you will live."
Climbing out of the pit to escape was impossible.
The Germans put a lot of mines, so they could not really try and escape. And he always described that at the end of the day, they were brought down with a ladder to the bottom of the pit. The ladder was taken out, was taken away, so there was no way they could climb it up.
Their only chance at freedom was to dig through the floor.
And they had like a cupboard, and the cupboard used to cover the entrance to the tunnel.
This is what the geophysics team will scan for. When they process their data, the tunnel entrance inside the pit shows up clearly, in exactly the same spot where the Lithuanian team found it in 2004.
Oh my God.
There's a resistivity section. We have a slightly more conductive anomaly.
Equally important, the signal matches the first reading they got 130 feet away, roughly the length of the tunnel, according to the survivors' stories.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Now we know exactly what we're looking for.
It seems they have the beginning and end of the tunnel. But can they find the rest of it?
Lots and lots of naysayers that will say any 2 points will make a line. Show me a third point. So yeah, I think we need a third point to convince everybody.
Months before the tunnel was begun, in September 1943, the Germans begin killing the last ghetto residents, a process known as liquidation.
So my mother, she always had another plan of what would happen. And she pushed me over like a wall or a hall or whatever. But you know what she said to me before in Yiddish? Mein Kind soll keinmal nicht vergessen, ob ich da Jiddische, which means my child, never forget that you're Jewish. And she pushed me out.
Sam Bach was taken with his father to a work camp. But for children, it was no safer than the ghetto.
So about 200 kids that were in the camp were killed. And my father brought me out to the gate of the camp, carrying me in a sack. Therefore, my last memory of my father is the feeling to be on his shoulder, is a kind of a physical feeling of his presence. I don't even know if the voice of somebody shouting, "Run, run, run," when they liberated me from the sack. I don't even know if it is his voice or somebody else's voice. But then he was just killed a few days before the Russians arrived.
In 1944, the Soviets drive out the Germans, annexing the country. They would rule for nearly 50 years. In the Great Synagogue Yard, the archaeology team finds what appears to be a remnant of the Soviet era.
Yeah, do you know what it is?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, from a gun.
It was obviously shot because of the dots over there. I do believe it's Russian.
A Russian-made bullet from the post-Nazi era, when the few remaining Jews alongside other minorities had to endure the Soviets' attempt to stamp out their religion and culture.
It was not so easy in the Soviet time. They could not go to synagogue, but you know, the people were so anxious that they wanted to have their culture so much.
Fearing their precious artifacts would be destroyed by the Soviets, Jewish leaders sent them away. Today, one precious treasure has returned.
In 1960, my father came to Vilnius, where he met the leaders of what was left of the Jewish community. And at this meeting, they produced this scroll, and they pleaded with him to take it out to the West for safekeeping.
So that's extraordinary. These are valued possessions of every community. These really are the most important possessions of every Jewish community with the Torah scrolls.
The Torah will be authenticated while the team returns to work. They only have 2 days left on their permit to find and document the mikvah, the ritual bath, but they've uncovered an important clue.
We have an arch. You can see the bricks over here.
What kind of depth are we at right now?
Roughly 1.5 meters.
With the clock ticking, the team digs in shifts. And then, a lucky break. Literally.
Oh my goodness.
They clear away a small hole.
If we can get in underneath, then we may have won the lottery.
How, you hit the floor?
Right now I did.
How much is that?
360.
360?
Yep.
That's deep. It's about 10 and a half feet.
The hole is just large enough to fit a GoPro camera.
You can see brickwork.
Wall?
Like a wall or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are going down.
I think that's pretty clear that's a heater. It looks like a water heater. We're standing in the corner of the vault. The line would continue more or less in a line to where Jogis is standing over there, and about 3 or 4 meters in that direction.
Yep.
And somewhere around close to the back wall, we have a heater.
Yeah.
A metal heater. which is heating up water.
Yeah.
A water heater, likely for the bathhouse and mikveh.
That's the fun of archaeology, is you've got no idea what we're going to find down there.
No, it's the first time I actually see
Something
something
like that. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's been a good day.
A good day indeed. They've found an intact piece of the Great Synagogue complex.
It's absolutely successful. We will find more, I hope, in the future, and that's the way archaeology works. You find a bit now, and you come back next year and you find the rest.
At Punar Forest, where the Nazis murdered about 70,000 people, the geophysics team is within striking distance of finding the escape tunnel. They found 2 cross-sections, but they need more evidence to prove that it was actually completed and used.
I'm going to split the difference between these two. Yeah.
A sudden rainstorm might actually help.
It's a lot easier to get current into wet sand than dry sand, so the rain actually works in our favor.
If they find it, they will have tangible proof for what have been only stories handed down from the survivors to their children.
Their accounts are riveting because they give us detail. And on the last night of Passover, April 15th, between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock, they knew that there was great danger, but they were going to try to get through the forest without making too much noise.
The guards heard the steps, and that's when they start shooting.
And the guards started firing indiscriminately. They didn't see anybody, didn't know who they were firing at. My father was able to climb out of there and start running.
Of the 80 prisoners, only 11 escaped and made it through the war.
It is one of the most horrific escapes that we have in the Holocaust. But it also is, the great testament to the courage and survival.
Once in the forest, they were found by Abba Kovner and the partisans. Some joined the fight against the Nazis.
My father said, we wanted to fight, we wanted revenge.
Years later, Abe Gall's father ended up in America. The engineer, Yearly Farber, returned to his birthplace in Russia. Hannah's father, Motki Seidel, settled in Israel, as did Chaim's father and the rest of the survivors. For decades, their words were the only evidence for the tunnel. Now, modern technology is about to prove the story true.
The inversion's finished?
Yep.
Because there on the screen appears the 3rd piece of their tunnel.
Yeah, this is astounding. Like, as good as we possibly could have hoped for.
That's our 3rd point.
Oh,
okay. Oh, my God. 2 feet.
We've found a major part of the tunnel. And there's something extremely personally moving about knowing what these people must have gone through in those 76 days.
2 last scans provide the final confirmation.
So the tunnel is many feet below where I'm standing right now. It extended at about the same level under this hill, out in this direction. Our technology indicates it's approximately on this alignment under this hill and continued for about 90 to 100 feet. And the exit is somewhere beyond this area here.
The news of the discovery soon makes international headlines, reaching the survivors' children in Israel, who are eager to see the proof of their father's stories.
לחסות את ההורה שלו במלט או זה מזעזע.
You see all the blue? That's sand. And we have 5 slices that we did of the tunnel.
Where is the entrance to the tunnel?
The tunnel is at the corner here.
It's just like my father, he used to do with the hands. We dug just like this, just behind the kitchen.
This is a very special opportunity to look at what happened at that place.
It was something that you felt was really unreal, and you thought, well, they mystified some of it. And then everything is here.
The moment I saw it, I was shocked.
This actually closes a full circle for me. Absolutely.
Modern technology has brought them the closure they thought they would never have. But the civilization known as Vilna is gone. More than 95% of the Jewish community of Vilnius was destroyed, and thousands of other lives were taken. A vital culture, hundreds of years old, embodied by the great synagogue at its center, is extinguished. The Torah scroll, back from safekeeping, has been authenticated. It is one of the last surviving pieces of Vilna, now kept in one of the city's only active synagogues. As time passes, memories of Vilna and its people will fade and die out. But the truth of what happened here has not been forgotten. And now, through the proof that science has given us, it will never be erased.